fuel tanks, engines, and wiring. It's time to wrap up some final steps on the Skymaster Su30 in white Russian camel scheme. Let's get busy. Last video, we finished with gluing in our bung fittings into the tanks. We are ready to do some plumbing on these tanks, but first thing we need to do is rinse these guys out with some isopropyl alcohol. I carry multiple bottles of this stuff. Dump it in, half of it, clean it out, dump the other half in, clean it out, lather, rinse, repeat. All right, so we kind of have our parts gathered up here. So this tube here, this 3/16 tube, 4.76 millimeters, this is the stuff that I buy specifically to do these high flow tanks. So it's got nice big diameter on the inside of the tube. And the reason for that is when you're dealing with a long tank like this, you typically want to have a rigid piece of tubing in the middle. And that is to make sure your clunk stays at the back and doesn't fold back on itself. So this is what we're going to be using here. This is about the length of piece that we need, and we'll use the rigid piece in the two first tanks to drain. This tank here, I don't think we're going to be using the rigid tube. I think we're probably just going to use a clunk line, but we'll see how that goes there. So I'm going to get this stuff organized and I'll show you guys what it looks like. So now we're going to take our middle tube here, we're going to use our torch, and we're just going to get some blobs of solder put on the ends. That just helps to keep the line on the tube, and when we tie wire that or safety wire it, it's not going to pull off. So here's our long tank clunks. So we've got obviously the piece of hard tubing in the middle, and this is the Pro-Line Sullivan tubing, I think is what it's called. I don't have the package anymore, but this stuff is awesome. It's insanely expensive, but impervious to all fuel types, never stretches, never hardens, such nice stuff. This is, I really don't use it a lot other than in this situation, just in this little stretch right there. But I've already got one of these installed. So when I install these guys, there's a couple important things that I'll make sure I do. So number one, you want to make sure there's no crud on the fitting itself. And when you get these fittings, they generally have a little bit of lithium grease or grease on the O-ring here. But I find when I clean it off with isopropyl alcohol, it gets rid of all the grease. So I put just a little bit of silicone lube on that O-ring. You do not want to use Loctite on these threads. You will never get it off. And thread that in. And because the O-ring, you don't really need to go crazy, but I just take my channel locks here, just grab it and give it just a little, hi-yah! Not much, hardly any force at all, just to snug things up. And we've already checked our clunks there, but we are golden on the main tanks. Now we'll do the other main tank, the last tank, and we'll just get our clunk lines done up for that. All right, so when I was planning this tank setup out, I did not think about this correctly and only put one vent on this tank. I knew I ordered 4 for a reason. Anyways, so unthreaded this guy. It's really not a big deal to get them out when you are using the threads like this. So we unthreaded the bung fitting, and we have marked 2 new ones. So these are going to go right above the bungs, and we're going to have those kind of pointed sideways like this, so they can bypass the electronics and come down the side. So again, when you're thinking about this stuff, you always want to go from the UATs and the final path to the vent, right? So we're going to go from the UATs to the main tank. It's going to fill up the main tank, come out the vents. It's going to fill up the saddle tanks, come out the vents, and go outside the plane. So we need 2 vents on this one to match up with our 2 bung fittings on that one. And then these vent fittings will come to a T and then go outside the aircraft from that single fitting. So on this main tank, we're also going to use the DreamWorks heavy clunks. Reason for that on this tank is because we're just using the line on this tank, so it's not going to have the rigid tube. Just feel more confident using these guys over the stock ones. So stock ones probably fine, but I ordered these for these tanks, or for this tank. So our bungs and clunks are set up for the main tank. We've got our vents reinstalled, filled the old vent line with high sol there. Now the black line here is the same inner diameter as the yellow line. The yellow line is just much more flexible. So I don't want to use the yellow line in the black tank or the main tank here, because I want these clunks to basically stay in the back and move around, but not be flopping all over the place. In the saddle tanks, we want them to be fairly agile on this first section, but rigid on the back section. So that's my thinking behind what I've done here. So our tanks are done. All right, so now we're gonna leak test our tanks. We can only do the main tanks right now because we've got to wait for the high sol to dry. So you can do this two ways. You can fill up your tanks with your mouth with some pressure, like I've done right here, and submerge the tanks underwater. You can check for leaks. I'm not a huge fan of that if I have time, because we've got some wood parts on here that I don't really want to get wet. And if you've got time, you basically pressurize the tanks, leave them sitting for 2 hours overnight, whatever you can manage. And in the morning, if you come out here and you open the pinched off line here and the air comes out, you know that it's holding pressure. So what I've done is blocked off our vent line, doesn't matter which side you're doing this on, and put a piece of tubing on the clunk line, blew with my mouth in these tanks. Now on long tanks like this, I won't actually even blow as hard as I can, but there is quite a bit of pressure in there. But this type of tank has quite a bit of forgiveness, so just be careful. And then you pinch the tank off with a pair of forceps. So we'll leave that be. We'll do the same thing to the other tank, and we will check back with those in the morning. All right, so tanks have been sitting for 24 hours. I can still feel that there's pressure inside there, so let's release our clips. There we go. We got air coming out. Perfect. So we know those tanks are good to go. Okay, so our main tank, our back tank, has been sitting for about 2 hours now. Let's pop this open and see. Oh yeah, no problem. So our tanks are good. That means we get to install the back tank and get some wiring done. Let's get this sorted out. Okay, so it's much easier to get the tanks plumbed and wired before you slip this in the back of the aircraft. Yes, there's lots of room, but doing the tie wire is much easier back here. So what we've done is I've measured the distance from the main tank to the UATs and added about 8 inches. So we've got an excess amount of a fuel line. We're using all 8mm fuel line here, all high flow stuff. And what I've done in this situation is I've made these two lines exactly the same length. So if I cut 4 inches off one of these tubes for a perfect install, we're gonna cut the exact same amount off that side. So thinking about this, the UATs fill the tank. This tank comes out the vent and goes to the bungs on the front tanks. So we need our next line to go forward and come beside these tanks and go in here. So I'm gonna get those measured up and we'll get those attached to the back tank. Okay, so we've got our rear tank in. I actually ended up taking the canards off. This was getting way too difficult to work on because they were right here, and that's kind of where you need to stand on the aircraft. So just undid the bolts and took those things off. We'll put them on at the end. But yeah, so we got that installed. That is honestly pretty tight because of the wires that come through here. And but it goes in there. It's a good fit. It's not going to go anywhere. So so that's done. Now we're going to put our central box on as the next thing, and then we'll be able to get all of our wiring organized. And once that's done, then we can move into getting the tanks in, but we're gonna get the central box in first. All right, so I'm just getting ready to install my servo leads, kind of going through these and planning things out. And I just realized that we've got our flaps right here, and I was looking up where they go, and we don't have a flap spot designated. So when I look at my layout, totally forgot about the flaps. So what we're probably going to do is move the air brake forward, move the nose wheel steering forward. All right, so with the wiring that we need to redo in the back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the cockpit out because we've got to run the air brake and nose wheel steering forward to that central box so we can fit the flap servos into the back central box. So we're gonna pull the cockpit back out. All right, so we changed some things around here and got our whole legend figured out here. Now this is an absolute disaster, but basically what we did was we pulled the air brake and the nose wheel steering from the primary central box. We replaced left flap, aileron or flaperon 1 and flaperon 2, so that's in 10 and 13. So that is done. And then what I went through here and did was we kind of simplified some things. Initially didn't have a randomizer. I pulled one of these out of the boxes of an upcoming build so we can replace this, but we've got a randomizer now. It works, all's well. So we simplified the slave central box. So now we've got all of our layout here. Pilots, which is going to be one channel for the randomizer, is number 7, and our number 9 is blank. Number 12 is kind of blank, but we basically have our power lead going to the gyro. Nose wheel steering and air brake have moved there. So we got our wiring all redone there. We've got our randomizer installed. So what I'll do now is I'm going to zip tie all of our connections again. We'll shoe goop all of our connectors because I pulled the shoe goop off that we did before, making sure we shoe goop the randomizer. You can see there with the randomizer that I put shrink tube around it, clear shrink tube, and put a white dot where the signal line is. So the point of that is obviously to protect any contact from shorting out the randomizer. So we've got all of our wires plugged in. There's still some left to plug in. So those I'm gonna run after we kind of get everything organized, and I'll show you what they are here. So we've got R2. R2 is running to the clone, which is no problem because it's just right there. We've got E1 R3. That is this guy here. We still need to run that. This is the line that joins both central boxes. 14 and 15, so E2 and E3, those are both telemetry inputs from the turbines, so those will come from here to here. We've got 11 and 12, which are throttle channels, so again those go right back there. And we've got 13 we still need to plug in, which is right flap aileron 2. So have that stuff organized. Now what I want to show you is our wing tube is right here. So in order to prevent this stuff from getting jammed with the wing tube, it's kind of hard to show you, but I've routed the wires like this, and I'm just going to take some zip ties and zip tie them together. Maybe a piece of Velcro, we'll have to see, but what that's going to do is that's going to keep it out of the path of the wing tube. And that's also why I ran the fuel tubing the way I did. So I ran the main clunk lines up over top of this brace. If we go down below, what happens is they're right in the path of the wing tube. So I think that's going to be the best method. We just need to be aware of that. Okay, so everything's been cleaned up in the midsection there. Everything is tight, tidy, and out of the way. I ended up using a piece of Velcro on that guy. So we're ready to install these tanks. So I'm going to do one tank at a time and just check and make sure there's no interference. But big steps ahead, and then once the tanks are installed, we got to figure out our air brake setup. All right, so we got the basis of our tanks installed here. When I had the lines come forward, I just flipped them over, makes nice big loops. And it really doesn't matter at this stage in the fuel system whether it's right or left, because they're all tied together. So yeah, so next thing to do is our vent lines. So what I did was I took a nice short piece of 8mm tubing, and it's going to fit in between these two. We can cut it in the center like that and add our T into the center point of that tubing, and then we'll be able to have our vent line come down. What we're going to do is we're going to make a few really tight loops. That's going to help prevent any fuel from flowing out of the fuel system, and then we'll just have that come out of the fuselage. All right, so just getting our vent set up here. Generally I use my Align reamer tool to get this all set up. Now a couple things I'll do on a vent system like this, the area where we're putting the vent is right down beside the UAT. I've already done the hole there. There we go, the camera's going to pick it up. And where that is on the underside is right beside the intake, right in the center of the screen. So we can plug the taxi tank into there. Taxi tank can sit on top of the wings. So that part of the fuselage is quite flexy, so I'll take this piece of plywood and we will glue down the piece of plywood, and then our fitting's going to go through that. Now, one of the things I generally always do on my fittings like this is put one of these split washers. Split washers are nice because as this tightens up, it's never going to loosen. So there are some times when I won't use a split washer if we've got a good thick surface to go through, but I generally always install a split washer on there. So let's get this glued in place and our vent line set up. And here is our plumbing line. So that's going to go to the 2 tanks. And then this is our loop. So the loop's going to plug in to the T right there. And then this little tail end here is going to come to the actual vent fitting itself. All right, tanks are plumbed. Vent line actually worked out really well. Yeah, so that's all done. Everything's tie wired, of course, so that is awesome. Next thing we're moving on to is the air brake setup. So this is going to be a little bit touch and go because we don't have any measurements or anything like that. So we basically have to kind of get it set up, figure out where it's going, and then glue it from there. So let's take a look at the basic air brake setup. Okay, so the air brake setup, obviously we have our cylinder, we've got our mount that spans both of the tanks. There's kind of a shot right back there. And we've got our 2 mounts that mount on the tanks. I put these together already, so we've got the blind nut there on the bottom. That should be totally fine. We'll make sure we use lots of high sol on these guys, so there's a little bit of a gap there for the threads to go through. So anyways, that's our mounts. This goes across there. These go through the bottom, and that's where our cylinder mounts. So the cylinder is going to be fastened just like that. So we do need to sand these guys out a little bit because these don't fit in there currently. So we'll get those sanded out, get the faces sanded out so we can high sol those in place. All right, so we've got the air brake actuator all ready here. Now I have switched out the stock hardware for some pan heads with some washers. The stock ones are too long. These guys are a little bit long. We're going to put a big glob of high sol on there, so that won't be an issue. I've kind of got everything set up here, marked out on the tanks. Now the way I did this was I had the air cylinder fully extended and just a little bit not pushing against the fuselage. So kind of came to this location and then down just a little bit like that, just so the air cylinder is going to be fully extended and we're not jammed against the fuselage. So now what I'll do is I'll get that glued in place, and we just need to let that sit and do its thing. All right, so air brake is now installed and curing. So obviously we paid attention to our marks, but what I did here is this air cylinder is essentially fully extended right now, and the air brake, like I mentioned, still has a little bit of leeway room. So looks like it should work out perfectly. And if you look at it from the back, we're nice and centered right in the middle of those tanks. So that should be awesome. So essentially the next steps for this, once this is cured, is this insert goes in this area. So what we'll end up doing is we'll end up cutting out a little bit of the base here. So this can slip over the air cylinder, get put down, and then they get screwed into place in the corners and along the sides. You can see the backing is already installed. Okay, so while we're waiting for the fuselage, we are going to do some painting on the canopy here. I'm going to paint the inside of this black because right now it is ugly and white. All right, so we've got the inside painted black. Fairly easy on this one because you got good access. Also did that area there as well, just so when you're looking through here, the back of the chair doesn't fully block the back, but it's a nice effect, gets rid of the ugly white. So, all right, now it's been a while since we have even looked at the Su30, and we're back on it. So we've got our engines in stock here. The Zykoi 240s have arrived, and it is time to wrap up this amazing aircraft. We still have lots to do. I'll give you guys a quick summary of what we have to do. So just spend some time going over everything, making sure we had a clear path on what we are doing. So starting from the back end, I'm just going to give you this summary. We've got to get our pipes mounted, our bell mouth mounted, turbines mounted, figure out our data relay modules here, run everything forward for the data relay module. The central box here is staying. Our fuel pumps need to be installed here. Our lines need to be run for our air brake. This plate needs to be installed for the air brake. We are switching out our central box 210 for a central box 400 in the front. So the reason we're doing that is for battery management. So the way we had it set up previously, our batteries go in the front end. They feed power to this central box and the central box back there. Problem is we're just using 2-cell LiPo batteries. So what happens with that is you start off flight number 1, you're 8.4, 8.2 volts, and then flight number 2, you're 7 volts, or 8 volts, or maybe 7.8. So you're not getting the full power of your servos. Generally on big planes like this, we like to use a 300 model or a 400 model, depending on how we have to lay it out. So the reason we're using the 400, we don't generally use this, but we're gonna have our batteries come into here, and the BEC outputs, which are programmable, they're gonna go to feed the central box 210 in the back. So we're gonna power this with 3-cell LiPo batteries, so 12 volts, and the servos here are going to receive 8.4 volts constant. The BECs are going to go feed that other central box, and they are also going to be a constant 8.4 volts, so better performance. And we've got a bunch of our scale bits and stuff still to put on. And then of course we have our test runs to do, CG checks, all that final stuff. So there's a lot to do in this video. So first thing to do is we're going to get our bell mouths mounted to our pipes with some rivets. All right, so we got our bells mounted to our pipe using some steel rivets, and we put 3 around the pipe. Now what we're doing is measuring, getting this all set up for inset between the turbine and the bell mouth right now. This is the best time to do it. So what we've done is measured the depth of the bell mouth, which is 64 millimeters. Half of that is 32 millimeters. So the end of our tail cone from our turbine, we want to have set at 32 millimeters, and that is what you want to do on these large bell mouths. So then the point of all of this is, so now we can measure the distance between our bell mouth and our engine mount, and we are at 55 millimeters. So when we put these all together, our depth here needs to be 55 millimeters, and we know that that's inset properly. Okay, so because our mounting ears are too narrow, we need to make some G10 extensions. So these are all the same, but we have marked these guys out. We'll drill them out, and then we'll use probably some 3mm hardware to get these guys mounted to the turbine, and then we'll drill our holes and mount stuff through the G10 plates. All right, so we got both of our pipes mounted. This is a bit of a tricky scenario. So there's some stock mounting holes in there with blind nuts. The problem with trying to use those ones is they are too far back, so you're actually on the angle of the bell mouth. So what I did was we just mounted our brackets onto the front edge of the bell mouth, worried, number one, about getting that pipe centered in the turbine. So we mounted one L bracket on one side, got the pipe in, got the turbine in, rotated it, got it all set up, and then marked it and did the other L bracket. So they're perfectly centered now, and we can screw those pipes down. Now on our vectored nozzles, there's some nuts on there, so the pipes bottom out on the nuts. So they're essentially, the distance is set. They can't come back any further, so that portion is fairly straightforward. The other part that worked out really well here is when we added our nuts and hardware to the turbine rail extensions, these nuts now sit perfectly in between the existing rails, and that perfectly centers these turbines. So when you put this turbine in the aircraft, there's zero movement side to side. All right, so we got both of our engines installed. That was quite a chore to fish the wires through, but they are done. So there's a shot there. Nice and solid, everything mounted well, nothing really out of the ordinary. So when you're using the Zykoy telemetry units like this, if you plug both of these in, the radio system won't know that there's a difference or there's two different engines. So what you have to do is you got to take one of the engines, so in this case we're doing our left side, and we've hooked up the sensor to a Y cable. One side has a battery, one side goes to the little screen, and we type in our fuel pump factor. All we have to do is change one of these numbers to be an odd number. So 401. And then the other one's going to be 400. So now the telemetry system will know that there's two different engines to pick up. All right, guys, so before we go any further with any more changes or finishing more parts on the aircraft, we're going to do our engine test runs on this thing. So first thing we have to do is we have to fill up the fuel system. So we've got our fuel system here from RC Custom 3D Printing. Thank you, Joe. This is going to tell us exactly how much fuel we're putting in the aircraft. So we filled up our UATs. They just started filling there, and we are going to fill this entire airplane up from empty. So what happens here is our UATs feed our back tank first and then our saddle tanks afterwards. So it's a bit of a different fueling system compared to what you would normally do, but of course our main tank is back there as well, which is behind the CG or close to the CG. All right, so we filled her up and she is 11 liters total with fuel. So our main tank, the rear tank is 3.5 liters. Each saddle is 3.75 liters for a total of 11 liters. It's a lot of fuel. So what that means with 11 liters of fuel, so 11 liters of fuel, that's 11,000 milliliters divided by 680 because we tested this engine already. So that's 16 minutes divided by 2 engines. So you could fly this plane at full throttle and never take the stick down and for 8 minutes. So 8 minutes at full throttle. Fun, fun. All right, so we're going to plug in our GSUs on the front of the engine, get our fuel tank volume set. So all you do when you have a twin setup like this is you've got 2 different engine volumes. So we're going to take 11 liters and we're basically going to program each turbine at 5.5 liters or 5,500 milliliters, and that's going to balance out the engine turbine telemetry. All right, it is test run time, so we're all ready to go with this aircraft. What we're going to do is, because we tested the left engine for our test run of this the Zykoy 240 engines, we're just going to run the right engine by itself first, and then after that engine we'll run both of them together. So all we're going to do is unplug the battery for the left engine, just run the right one, and then we'll run both together. As per normal, I will put up on the screen exactly what we're doing throughout the test run, so like a restart test, etc., and that'll give you guys some idea of what's going on in my head and what we're actually doing with the plane. I suspect with 2 240 engines, this thing's going to have a lot of push, so it's going to be entertaining to watch these 2 monkeys behind the screen try and hold this thing back.
I knew I was here.
Okay, so turbine number 1. Actually, this would be turbine number 2, technically.
Yeah, I was right outside. You got the fire extinguisher?
Okay, we'll do a restart check. Yeah, the restart's really fast.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, when there's two, it's gonna be nuts. All right, guys, so that is one engine. Tons of power on this thing. It's gonna be nuts with two. So we're waiting for this thing to cool down. We'll do a power cycle on it, and then we'll run two engines. All right, guys, so we are running two engines now. Ignition on both. Crazy? Ready? Yeah. Almost a 400, or this is a little more than a 400, right?
Wow.
Crazy. All right, so with engine runs done, it's time to start wrapping up our other items. So we pulled the board out here. This is the front board. The old Central Box 200 series was mounted right here. Cortex we kept in the same spot, and we just tuck the other Central Box right off to the side. So we have to do a little bit of battery management here. Essentially what happens is we've got our battery leads here which split off. So one lead came to this Central Box, the other lead went to the back Central Box. So we just need to split that off now where our battery plugs in. Batteries go into here, these lines go to feed the back Central Box. So not really a big deal. It's just a matter of getting those wire leads done up. All right, took a fair bit of messing around, but we got our Central Box 400 in there. Of course, we don't even need to use the one side of the Central Box. We've got everything plugged in on the right-hand side. This is more just to keep things nice and clean. That is done. We're going to organize our wires a little bit on this guy and get them fastened down, but that is awesome. All of our receivers and everything work good, so that is perfect. So I'll give you guys a bit of a rundown here. I'm not going to go into any explanations, but if you're looking to do a setup like this, so a 210 is our primary, the 400 is our secondary, I guess if you want to call it that, but it really doesn't matter. But this is how everything is connected. So there it is. I'll just leave it on that screen for a little bit. I won't go into any explanations, but that is how things are working. So with that stuff done, we're going to get our panel installed here on the back end. So everything is wrapped up. We're going to get the panel fit. Basically what we need to do is get the cutout done for the air cylinder. We're going to get the air cylinder hooked up to our air valve, and we'll get that panel installed. So air brake is all done. We ran our tubes Down here, they loop around and then go in our keepers we installed. Also installed a piece of shrink tube along there just to hold the line in place very solidly, and very happy with that. So that worked out great. Looks really good, and operates really nice as well too. I ended up putting 2 air restrictors. So took the cover back off and the line comes right down this side. Put 2 of the Robart inline air restrictors in those 2 lines. So there's one on both sides. Without them, the air brake shoots up and shoots down. With them, it's a lot more realistic. So yeah, so that is everything for the air brake. Now, going to fasten all of our wires in that central box, and we can get our cockpit in place. Man, this thing's almost done. All right, so before we put our pilots in, I'm going to do our adjustments on our random motion generator. So you basically have the rate, position, and frequency of movements are the different adjustments there. So we do lose access to that unit sort of when the cockpits are in, so easier just to make some adjustments now, which we've done. So let's get our cockpit and pilots installed. All right, so we've put our camera lens in here. This is our little miniature heat vacuum forming machine. Thank you so much, Kelly, for this. I love this little thing. It's so handy. So anyways, I put some tape underneath our light lens. The goal there is to raise it up a little bit, so when we vacuum mold this, we've got a little bit of excess to cut off. And this is right on the very front of the aircraft. This is kind of one of the final things that I wanted to do. So just heating up our piece of plastic there, and we will see how this pulls out. There we go, we're getting there. So model. Wicked, that turned out awesome. So I just wanted some more structure there, so when we cut this out, we have the same amount that we actually cut off. So that worked out really good. All right, so got our camera lens installed there. That's being glued in place right now. And you can see here, we've got our canopy and pilots all set up. So from a closed position, which is right now, we're gonna open it up. So canopy unlocks and opens, and canopy close. Beautiful. And lock. And then air brake down. And there she is, fully assembled. We'll get some pictures at the end here with me sitting behind the plane. It's hard to comprehend or explain to you, either one of those, how massive this aircraft is. And it's not even bigger, well, the F-14XL is bigger. So this SU is huge. It's a monstrous aircraft. Such a cool presence. This is the first time I've seen one in person, like fully assembled like this. And it's amazing. So really is, it's quite a piece of kit. This, I gotta say, this is probably one of the nicest Skymaster planes I have seen or worked on to date. I think the F-14XL will be very similar to this, but it's unbelievable. Yeah, it's really cool. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to, we've got batteries installed. We're not doing the CG check in this video. So the reason we're not doing the CG check is the owner already has one of these aircraft, and we're gonna do the same thing like with the F-16 that we're finishing up here. And basically what we do is, if you have 2 aircraft that are identical, as long as you're weighing the nose weight in the same configuration. So for example, if the owner put his entire plane together like this, no fuel in the fuel tanks, fuel in the UATs, batteries, no batteries, whatever it is, and he said that there was 6.5 pounds of nose weight when you weighed the nose. If we set this one up exactly the same nose weight, it would be identical. So it's just a matter of setting this plane up to his current plane based on the configuration. Well guys, that is her. So I did a couple final things here. I actually took the cockpit out again. I was gonna turn the lights on, then I'm like, oh, how do we have the lights powered? So anyways, I was worried that they were powered at 3-cell LiPo or 12 volts now instead of 7.4. but they're all good. There's our lens for our front camera thing or radar or whatever that is. Anyways, looks much better than the silver piece. And there she is. So she is complete. All right, so before you guys get to see the final result behind me, I'm gonna put a little plug in here for our Lighter Side of RC After Dark channel. So the After Dark channel is where we do our live streams here from the shop. Basically, it's about 2 hours every 2 weeks, and I love it because you guys get to interact with us during the live stream if you're watching it during the live stream. So it's a completely separate channel, so definitely check it out, the Lighter Side of RC After Dark. Subscribe there if you're not a subscriber already, and let's take a look at this beautiful Su30. Well, there it is. What a beauty. There was a lot of work left to do with the engine install and all the final little details. We had some gremlins pop up and just some things that I was thinking about in my head with rewiring the front end. That was definitely added some more complexity to it, but ultimately at the end of the day, this layout that we switched it to works better. So what a beautiful plane. This is one that I would love to own one day. Probably actually, I mean, this and the F-16 from Skymaster are both on the top of my list. This thing is just amazing. So what a plane, what a beautiful plane. Can't wait to see this get maidened in Montana at Montana Jets, middle of June. Thanks guys for following along. If you have any questions or comments, list them down below. You can also email me as well to thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. I'm getting tons of emails, so if it takes me a few days to get back to you, I'm not ignoring you, I'm just busy. And with the volume of emails coming in, sometimes it's a little hard to weed through them and reply to you all. So I do see them though, and I thank you for your kind comments. I thank you for your kind emails and your positive thoughts. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.